Welcome back to the Fundraising Beyond Borders podcast. I am just so thrilled to have Cindy Wagman here, the founder of the Fractional Fundraising Network. Cindy and I have been working together for many years now, and to be honest, I don't know if Fundraising Beyond Borders would be here today without Cindy. So Cindy, thank you so much for being here.
It is truly my pleasure. Thanks for having me.
We were just talking right before this. I was like, Cindy, I feel like I know a lot about you, but I actually really don't know a lot about your original journey in fundraising. So can you just tell us a little bit more about yourself, your intro to fundraising, and also where are you tuning in from?
Yeah, so I'm in Toronto, Canada, and I have a non-traditional entry into fundraising. So let's go back to when I was in my undergrad degree. And I was a little lost academically. I really didn't know what I wanted to do. I actually wanted to drop out of school. And one summer, I met two people who were professional fundraisers. And it clicked. Like I'd always been involved in nonprofits, and at school I was leading the Women's Empowerment Committee, and we hosted fundraisers. And I was like, oh, I can do this as a career. Like I can get paid to do the stuff I'm already doing. And I knew I loved the sector, but I definitely knew I wasn't like a frontline, program worker. That was not my skill set or interest. And this kind of clicked for me. So I decided at that point that I was going to be a professional fundraiser. So in my last year of undergrad, I wrote a thesis on feminist fundraising.
Wow.
And yeah, I'm that nerdy. And it's so funny to reread it, or parts of it, because it's like 60 pages long. But, this was over 20 years ago at this point. And that kicked it off. And I think because I had that thesis, I had landed a job fundraising at a women's shelter. It was perfect. I was their first and only hired fundraiser. And
wow.
Yeah. And I spent 4 years there really building up the program. And from there grew, I kind of say I worked my way up the nonprofit ladder, because we still have this ladder. I went from a very small organization to a national organization to a healthcare organization. And then eventually I was the director of development at the business school at the University of Toronto, which is pretty big, and ran their major gift fundraising. So that was what I call the corporate ladder of nonprofit fundraising. I felt like I'd made it, but I wasn't quite that happy. And when I was on mat leave with my second kid, I started consulting.
That's great. I had no idea really about your whole journey. So it's so fun to hear it all and where we all started. And I agree. I'm very similar to you. I was always involved in, nonprofit work or volunteer work or leadership, but I had no idea this could be a job. And I feel like we just really need to do a better job in North America of educating, high school and college students about this opportunity to be in our sector. Okay, so you then went into consulting. So tell us a little bit about your consulting journey, and then what led you to your role here today.
Yeah, so I kind of stumbled into consulting in the sense that I did not think that I was ready to consult. I was 35 years old and I had really good experience. I had at that point probably almost 15 years of fundraising experience. So I had the qualifications, but I just didn't think of myself as a consultant because I thought you had to be older and kind of semi-retired and all that kind of stuff. But I had a mentor. Her name is Lori Wilcox, who I always point out I think is single-handedly responsible for me starting this consulting journey. She introduced me to this organization. They're called Hot Docs. They're a documentary film festival and cinema here in Toronto. And they were looking for someone to run a capital campaign. And I loved so much about the organization and the project, but their budget was limited and I wasn't like unhappy at my job. So I really needed incentive to leave. And Lori coached me through proposing it to them as a consultant. So instead of doing a full-time gig, we'd basically they had this defined budget and we said, okay, well, instead of you paying me as a staff person and you have all the extra benefits and office space and all that kind of stuff, I'll do it as a consultant for 3 days a week. We'll start with a 2-year contract and we'll go from there, and I'll run the campaign and I'll come into the office if I want and I won't if I don't want to. And that negotiation changed so much for me. First of all, I've never been in a position in my career where I felt like I could ask for so much when it came down to job negotiation. Like I always felt like I was, begging, take a chance on me kind of thing. But I had earned that. It was a big mindset shift. And I knew I could do the job. I didn't need to be full-time, right? So that really launched me into consulting. And then at the time, my younger son was it was June 2015 and he was born in September. So like around 9 months. I think I started having the conversations with them when he was about 6 months old. But when I started, he was about 9 months old. And for a while, I just worked less and it was glorious because I was making more than I was in-house. And
Wow.
yeah, and he was 9 months. My older son was just over 3 years old. And that was keeping me pretty busy. And I enjoyed that. And then I got bored. So I started saying, okay, like what does it look like if I build a business, a consulting business? So at the time I did what I thought consultants do. So I was hired, I started networking, which is always the best way to find clients. And I went back to my network, which at the time, almost like back to my roots. So I was actually hired by the organization that was my first job. They hired me to help recruit someone for the fundraising position. I was hired by another organization to help recruit. I did kind of 3 things. I did some recruitment. I did some coaching of executive directors to help them better understand fundraising and utilize fundraising. And I did fundraising plans or strategies. So an organization would hire me to write, do an assessment and write a plan and hand that over to them. And none of them, the one thing I knew, I wanted to work with small organizations. So what I discovered is small organizations don't have that much use for any of those things as standalone. What was happening was with the fundraising plans, they weren't implementing it because there was no one who could do the work. The coaching and advice giving, again, no one was there to do the work. The executive director was so busy. I mean, there's a lot of mindset stuff too, which I eventually wrote a book about. But at the time, I was like, even if we work on the mindset, there's still a lack of capacity and time. And then also when it came to recruiting, they were hiring these junior people because they didn't have big budgets. And those people, there'd be really high turnover because what was happening is they weren't great fundraisers because they were early in their career. And no one in the organization was a great fundraiser because no one else was a fundraiser. And so they had an experience that was so similar to my early experience, which was like everyone telling you what to do, except no one knowing what you should actually be doing, and spending a lot of time on things that were not effective. So that's really what led me to think about, okay, what if we did the work? Like, what if we came in, what if I hired someone junior on my team and I would supervise them and we'd come in, we called it Done For You Fundraising, where we would just come in and run their fundraising program. We would be that junior staff person, but they'd also get me overseeing that junior staff person. And what would that look like? And we started doing that. and I built a small agency. We had an office in downtown Toronto, and I loved it. I loved it. It was working. We were busy. There was such demand for the work. And during COVID, things shifted a little bit for me. There were a number of factors that just led the work to feel very heavy. And the growth felt heavy. So the demand was growing and growing for our services. And I was like, how am I going to find more staff people like the amazing team I have? Like, I don't think I can find anyone else like these people, which is not true, but it just felt that way at the time because there was lots going on. And in Ontario, where I live, we had the longest school shutdown in North America.
Wow.
Yeah. My kids were basically out of school for like almost 2 years. It was bonkers. Like anyways, it was really, really, really hard. There was a lot of online schooling. My mom and stepdad helped me out a ton, helped my husband and I out a ton. Basically, like for a year, I took the kids to her house every day and I worked
You would
from
have
there.
to.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And neither my husband or I could stop working. Like we needed the income. I had a team. He had, so it was a really heavy time. So I thought, what if instead of me finding these junior people and training them, what if I found experienced fundraisers who already knew how to do all the work, didn't need my supervision? So like, how could I remove myself and my time from this and still be able to help small organizations with that fundraising? And that's what I started doing. We called it so many things at the beginning. It was the constellation and all these other things.
That's right. Yes,
Yeah.
that's right.
But that led to the fractional fundraising movement or network or academy, which all mean different words for a similar thing, which is now I basically train fundraisers with 7+ years experience on how to start their fractional fundraising business and get fully booked. That's through the Fractional Fundraiser Academy. And we have a network. So we have 45 active members in this network. And thus I call it a movement because there is a big shift happening in the sector around how we look at human resources. And fractional executives are growing in popularity across the board.
Absolutely. And Cindy, it's so fun to hear this whole journey of yours because going back to probably 4 years ago when I decided, I wanted to go independent as well and was trying to figure it out what I wanted to do. I so vividly remember during COVID going on walks because there wasn't much you could do, going on walks and listening to your podcast at the time. It was the small
nonprofit. Yeah,
podcast. And just thinking the world of you, I'm like, okay, I can do this. And this is exactly what I wanted to do, for international nonprofits. Because, back in 2016, when I first started my, as a fundraiser for international nonprofit, and I was trying to look for resources out there was nothing. And I was like, there's got to be something. And, I told myself during that time, I'm like, once I get these tools, once I'm equipped, once I've learned it, I don't want any other fundraiser to feel like the way I have felt. And so, you were doing a lot of that for us. And so it's just been so fun to follow your journey. I remember the constellation at the time, it being called that. And then, when fractional fundraising came out, that's exactly what, my clients needed. And I was already kind of doing that a little bit with like what you're saying, the done for you, but there's just so many small nonprofits out there that want to do well. They want to make a big change. They want to do make a big impact, but they're kind of like at this awkward in-between stage, aren't they? They're wanting to grow. They just don't necessarily have the finances to hire a senior fundraiser yet. Yeah. And fractional fundraising is the best thing they could do to really move the needle, make a big impact, and get them ready for kind of that next phase. Or maybe they want to stay small, and that's absolutely fine. But it just opens the doors for so many small to medium-sized nonprofits. So Cindy, if you
Exactly.
don't mind telling us, what is fractional fundraising? Just kind of
Mhm.
an overview of like, what does that even mean to an organization?
Yeah. So think of it, if you're an organization listening to this, think of it as a staffing model, but it's different than hiring someone in-house and it's different than traditional consulting. So when you hire in-house, you have someone who, like, even if you're remote working, like you have someone who's there and they're doing all the things, but obviously your budget only goes so far. And so often with when you're hiring in-house, you need someone in-house who can supervise, who has that strategic oversight. And you're basically finding someone who's like a worker bee. Um, when you hire a consultant, traditional consulting models, you're looking at someone who is short term. They come in for a very
Mm-hmm.
specific project and then they leave. So they could do the work. Like there are consultants who will come in and run a campaign for you and things like that, but they're time limited and they're very narrowly focused. A fractional fundraiser comes in and or fractional, any executive, what they do is they're an embedded part of your team, but they bring the strategic oversight that's often lacking in organizations so that the leadership of the organization can take the mental load of that function off of their shoulders. And so they don't have to worry. And it could be fundraising. So, like, I don't have to worry that the fundraising work is being done. I have to supervise and, like, make sure all the things happen. But similarly, like with HR or marketing or finance, like, if you have a fractional CFO, let's say, you don't have to worry about supervising that person to make sure the reports are being run and the, balance sheet is working out. You don't have to think about those things in the way that you do when you hire someone without that experience. So you're getting that strategic oversight at like an executive level function, but they're an embedded part of your team and they're getting the work done. So it depends on what function you're getting the fractional executive for, but for small organizations that are hiring fractional fundraisers, you're getting a fraction of their time. So they're not full time, they're a consultant, so they're responsible for their hours, not you. They're all the things that come with, they have their own equipment, all the things that come with being a contractor, right? So they have their own equipment, they set their own hours, all of that. They're responsible for those things. And they're going to come in, they're going to do the strategic oversight, but they're also going to get the work done. They're going to write the grants or the appeals. They're going to reach out to the donors, all of the things that are required to run that department.
That's great. And we have two different services, fractional fundraising and then custom fundraising plans. So what I love about this with fractional fundraising is, yes, like you're saying, we're going to come in and do the strategy, the planning, really have that like oversight. And then we actually go and do it for you. So we do the implementation and it's the consistent implementation, which I think is really key as well. And
Yes.
two, I know not a lot of nonprofits worry about is it going to feel like a consultant? Like when you're talking to donors or when you're talking to other supporters, does it feel like you're not part of the organization? But that's not true, right? You become part of that organization, and which I think is really important and I guess key to the implementation side of things.
Exactly. And I think the long-term aspect is really critical to emphasize. You mentioned it, but I'm going to say it again because it's so important. If you're an organization listening to this and you're like, oh, this sounds really good, this is not a quick fix. There are no quick
Yes.
fixes. If there was a quick fundraising fix, we'd all be rich because everyone would use it. Um, the fundraising success for any organization comes from having the right strategy with a clear action plan and then consistent implementation. It's a bit of a three-legged stool. And fractional fundraisers blend all three, but the consistent implementation really needs to be at least 12 months. like for your investment, and I see this and I've seen this over and over in organizations where they'll hire a fundraiser, they'll work for 6 to 8 months and like, oh, well, where's the money? It's not coming in, and they'll let that person go. Or the person will feel so stressed because there's so much pressure on them to bring in the money that they're going to leave for another job. And that is literally flushing away the investment. There's no value to short-term fundraising thinking.
Yes.
You really need to look at this. Like, we start on 12-month contracts because it takes that long to see a return, to see things start to mobilize and take place, and really start to reap the benefits of this work. And so, I mean, oftentimes 12 months is the starting point, right? You want consistent implementation over many years, and that's where you really start to see your fundraising grow. I often talk about fractional as it's not really a bridge, it's a ladder. So for an organization, it's kind of laddering up where their current fundraising is to where they want it to be. And sometimes that ladder is like a few years long, but it really does take time to see fundraising results. And anything that's not patient is often, I want to say self-destructive. It's not helpful.
No, I agree. And every nonprofit is different too. So I think that's what's always key with talking about with nonprofits is like, so they might know another nonprofit who's had fractional fundraising, but that nonprofit is completely different. They're going to have a completely different strategy. It's going to, I'm working with one client right now with fractional fundraising, and it's taken basically 10 months so far just to get the systems in place. And it took a little bit of time, but I mean, every day the executive director is like, you have no idea how helpful this has been just to get all of the systems in place first, because we're going to have such a strong foundation, and then we can go and build on that from there. And then no matter who they hire too, there's all these systems in place. It's just going to run a lot more efficiently. But to make those systems happen and to create those systems, it takes time, like you're saying. So 12 months, I would say, is definitely like the bare minimum. And then you're going to start to really see that return.
Exactly. And I want to also bring up the point you made about this sort of plan and having the plan, because one of the things that comes up a lot is like, what is the right fundraising for us? What can I expect when I hire a fractional fundraiser? And I get that a lot because people are used to working with consultants where they have very clearly defined deliverables and activities, and it's very specific. And you're like, okay, you're coming in, you're doing this. This is the timeline, it's done. Or they're used to having a staff person where they create a job description. I mean, I feel like what I used to do, full disclosure, is I'd look at job boards, like AFP job boards, and then I would blend those together and create a job description. Nowadays, you can ask ChatGPT for one, but the people creating those job descriptions don't actually know fundraising either. And so the job description is kind of like literally everything you can think of about fundraising in one. And that's not really that clear or helpful either. So what a fractional fundraiser in particular will do, at least the way we train people, is we come in, we do a fundraising plan, which very clearly focuses in and sets goals around the few fundraising strategies and tactics that are well aligned to your organization. So you should not be doing every kind of fundraising under the sun. You should be focused and doing the things that make sense for your donor base, for the strengths of your organization, for all of these things. So it's hard sometimes to understand or get your mind over this idea of like, well, what exactly are they going to do? Because it's not traditional consulting. It's more similar to hiring in-house, but the focus is more narrow, but more impactful. And the fundraiser will create a plan so that when they do start, like a couple months after they start, you will have very clear expectations, but at the beginning, you need to let them set those expectations because that's why you're hiring a fractional. They have that strategic oversight. They understand how to set goals and how to create plans. So that's also a little nuance.
I like that. And that's why I go through 4 phases with my clients at the very beginning of fractional fundraisers. So we first assess, like you're saying, we got to figure out what's working, what's not working, what are those barriers, what are your team's everything. We go through a whole assessment phase, then clarify what are those 3 fundraising activities that are going to have the highest return on investment? How do we put a plan together? And that's the strategy and then the implementation. So that takes a couple months to go through those first 3 phases. And it depends on every organization and how much we have to assess. So we've talked a lot about like what is fractional fundraising. And Cindy, if somebody's listening in and they're like, is this for me? Who is fractional fundraising for? We talked a little bit about the beginning, but like who are those kind of key players or what do these nonprofits look like?
So from a nonprofit perspective, there's kind of multiple answers. The way our network works is we're really focused on small organizations that have the capacity to hire. So they have budget. You're not like no budget, like what have you. You have budget to hire a staff person or help with your fundraising at a living wage. I'm going to add that because that's really important. Our sector often undervalues people. So you have to have like a meaningful investment. But you want to really maximize that investment. And I would say it's really great for organizations where the leadership doesn't really know fundraising. So they don't have that strategic capacity existing in their organization. And they don't have the day-to-day support and implementation. It's always great if you have some like administrative support, like someone who can help with the database and stuff like that. But even that, sometimes they don't. And yeah, you're ready to invest in your fundraising, but you really want to optimize that investment. And you're not equipped to really supervise someone in that role, which is most small organizations. So yeah, you have to have usually like you have some fundraising revenue, you've really maxed out the capacity you have in-house without hiring. And you're ready to hire. You have the budget to hire. And I always say, like, think of that first year as an investment, right? Like, you're not going to get, I talked about this already, you're not going to get immediate returns. Like, you are investing in your organization's future and growth. And so think of it that way. It's worth mentioning that there are other organizations who can benefit from fractional support. It's not a specialty in our network, but organizations who maybe are a little bit bigger, who have more, not necessarily a lot, but who have more day-to-day fundraising implementation capacity, but still lack the strategic oversight, but they don't have the budget for like a chief development officer or director of development. And they want someone who can come in and provide that strategic oversight of the team who's doing the work. That also is a form of fractional executives. It's just not necessarily what our network specializes in, but that could be a good fit as well.
No, that's great. I think too, oftentimes people come to me and they're like, okay, so after 12, and we've talked about this a little bit, after 12 months is like, do you leave? Is it like, are you off you go for like as a fractional fundraiser? And no, it kind of depends on what your goals are and what the nonprofit's wanting to achieve out of fractional fundraiser, how much return on investment you want to see, like we were just talking about. So it's not like we just go in 12-month contract and then we leave. I have one client, I've been working with them for years, and that's okay. And then there's some where you get them to a really great point and they're ready to hire in-house. So tell us a little bit more about that. Like, what do you kind of see the length of fractional fundraisers staying in? Is it a one-size-fits-all approach, or is it kind of just dependent?
Yeah. So that's such a great question. And the best answer to all great questions is it depends. So it very much is dependent on the organization and what that growth has looked like. So I always say 1 year is a starting point because really anything less than that is a waste of money. You're not going to get any traction with less than that. So it's a starting point. I think ideally these are multi-year engagements to really optimize the impact. How many years depends, but at some point your organization will probably outgrow your fractional fundraiser. That's the goal. That is what we want. We want you to get to a point where you can hire in-house, and your fractional fundraiser can actually help do that, help you recruit and onboard someone. So it depends on how long it takes for your organization to have a meaningful budget to find that qualified person. And also sometimes organizations are just like, we cool. So we have one member of our network, Betty, has been working with an organization called Vibe Arts for 6+ years. And they're just happy with the status quo. They kind of just feel like there aren't that many funding opportunities that they haven't already explored. And they're good because now they work well together and there's no reason to change. So again, it depends on the organization, their traction with their fundraising, what they want, but there's a lot of variation. But as I said, 12 months is the starting point in my mind. I don't think, though, that any organization will commit to more than that up front. And so that's why we start with 12 months, because by that point, you'll be having some traction and you'll start to see, okay, this is working. Let's keep going. As I said, before that, you're not going to feel those things. You're not going to see those things, and you're going to get impatient. I can tell you, because that happens. And if you, quote unquote, like pull the plug too early, it's a wasted investment.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so before we head off, I just want to also talk about, for those listeners that are fundraisers themselves or in-house fundraisers, and they are very curious about becoming a fractional fundraiser, because I was there, several years ago. I would love for you to share a little bit more about what you've done with the Fractional Fundraising Network, because for me personally, it has just absolutely enhanced myself as a fundraiser and as a fractional fundraiser, and the community involved and all the resources and the training. So share a little bit more about the network that you've created.
So my academy, the Fractional Fundraiser Academy, is basically a training program to help fundraisers who have 7+ years experience to start their own fractional fundraising consultancy. And the idea is to take all of the things that we've stress tested over the last really 9, almost 10 years since I started consulting, and really even before that in my experience with the sector, and turn that into what I call like a business in a box. So it's designed to really be your fast track to consulting, and to consulting in a way where you don't need a lot of clients to make good money and have stability. So we talk a little bit about like how much, not a little bit, we talk about how much you should be charging your clients and all of that. And it varies depending on where you are, but typically most of our fractional fundraisers start their contracts at $4,000 a month. And what that means often is you're working with if you want to be working full-time, about 3 clients. And you can make 6 figures doing that with 3 clients a year. And some of those clients are multi-year. So it's designed to give you independence and your own consultancy, but also some stability of having long-term contracts that are retainer-based. So there's very little fluctuation in your revenue. And you don't need to build like a big agency, right? It's just you. You don't need to market. You don't need to do all these fancy things. I always say it's for people who really like to do good work and have a big impact on organizations. you are doing the implementation. So it's not just strategy. It is day-to-day stuff. Like it's well suited to you if you like to do, like you like to get your hands dirty, so to speak. That being said, there's lots of variations. So you're a great example, Morgan, that I talk about a lot, where you've taken this model and it's a part of your overall business's offerings. So it's not the only thing you do, but it gives you really strong foundations and consistent revenue for you to be able to like do the other things. And you're building an agency. And we actually have a few, like a good handful actually of our members who are building agencies. They're bringing on team members and they're working with way more than 3 organizations. And that's also a really cool opportunity. And some fractional fundraisers are like, you know what? I want 2 organizations and that's it. I want to work less. I have a number of people who work with 1 or 2 organizations, and that's sufficient for where they are in their life and what their needs are right now. So there's a lot of flexibility in the model.
Awesome. Thank you for sharing more. And, that's like Cindy was saying, there's multiple different services within my business. But at the end of the day, what was so important for me, and like I said at the very beginning, was to be able to provide resources for international nonprofits because there's just not a lot out there. And the fact that we actually get to provide implementation, it's just game changer for these nonprofits. So for us as a company, it's the impact involved, right? It's just so meaningful being able to take one client, from A to really Z at the end of the day and just kind of transform their fundraising and how they think and their support and that overwhelm. Like so many clients just come to us just feeling so lost and overwhelmed or not knowing where to start, or, international fundraising is a whole nother beast. So it's like, how? And so I think it's just so amazing that fractional fundraising has even become a thing these days, and that we're able to really serve nonprofits in a really meaningful, strategic way. It's just been amazing. So thank you for, bringing this, like quite literally bringing this movement to fractional fundraising, because it's just been such a journey and so amazing to watch Cindy she's built this community of fractional fundraising. How many I don't even know how many are there?
45, actually I think it's more like 47 active members. And then I've trained about 60 fundraisers over the years. So it's pretty awesome. And we're hosting a virtual summit for anyone interested in becoming any kind of fractional executive in the nonprofit sector. Or if you're already a fractional executive in the nonprofit sector, we have a summit called Fractional Shift, which is designed to help you get started or help you grow. And it's for free, which is awesome. So January 14th and 15th, which is probably around the corner from when this airs. And Morgan will have links for that in the show notes.
Definitely. Yeah, please join. I'll be there. I cannot wait.
Yeah.
And like I was just saying, there's so many, I think that's one of my favorite parts too about the network is, our Slack channel, just popping questions, the networking. I've met the amount of Canadians. I think I knew like 2 Canadians 5 years ago, and now I can't even tell you how many Canadians I know, which I love. So the networking involved, which is so cool. It's really a special place.
Yeah, I love the community. That's my favorite part, and that's what brings me so much joy. Is like I feel really privileged. I get to help all these fundraisers redefine their careers, and it truly is a place of community over competition. So I just saw like someone post in Slack, they're closing clients, like I'm almost at capacity, which means anyone new coming in, like I'm sending it out as a referral in the network. There's just such a great supportive environment where people, they share stuff about their business, they share stuff about fundraising, like all of the things. And yes, I'd say like 40% are maybe like 60% are Canadians because I'm in Canada. And I'm curious because you said Z and I know you're American, but what do they say in like the African continent? Do they say Zed or Zed? Okay,
Zed. My husband and I were just talking about this today actually, because I was looking at a sign and I almost said B, Z, and S, and he's like, us.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's funny how
Yeah,
how that
definitely.
changes.
When you said that, I was like, I clocked it right away. I was like, oh. But yeah, so we do have people across North America and a couple in different countries in Africa, which is super cool. And I see us expanding more globally over the next few years. So it's a pretty awesome place.
Well, Cindy, it's been such a pleasure having you. Thank you so much. Two quick things before you head off. First, love just to where can guests connect with you? How can they connect with you?
So my favorite place to hang out is LinkedIn. You can find me at Cindy Wagman, CindywWagman. And my website, like I have like a bunch of websites. So you'd say fractionalfundraising.co is the best place for all things fractional fundraising. Yeah, let's do that one.
Perfect. Perfect. And then Cindy, just because we are international podcast, I would love to know, do you have any big trips booked or would you
Do
want
I
to go
ever?
anywhere? I know, anywhere internationally. Tell us all.
Yeah. So, okay. I love travel and it's one of my values that I really want my kids to appreciate and experience while they're young. So, this coming year, the next 25 months is we're going to Mexico. My stepdad's Mexican. So we're going to Mexico over the holidays. And then we're going to Japan in
Oh my gosh.
March. I know. I'm so excited. This is my first time anywhere in Asia. And then we're talking about coming to South Africa, which I'm really excited about as an opportunity because that's where my mom is from and her whole family. So she's never been back and I've never been. And I mean, it's like a member of our family in terms of like the stories that I heard growing up from my grandmother and mostly my grandmother and my mom a little bit. You know, my grandmother would tell me stories of her childhood growing up like with an orchard and like picking plums, I think, peaches, one of the two. And I mean, this is so random. My grandfather he was like a chemist, I think, and he started a soap company that still exists. So Gill Soap in South Africa is like was my grandfather's company, which he left all of that behind when they left. But yeah, so I'm really, really excited about the possibility. And it seems very extravagant to do two really big international trips in the year. But my older son starts high school in
Okay.
September. So we feel like that's kind of the last chance to take him out of school for things. So we're going all in.
For our South African listeners, go and send Cindy a LinkedIn message and do all the convincing to get her down to Cape Town. It is one of my biggest goals to get Cindy. I often go down to Cape Town and would love to have Cindy there just to network with other fundraisers within South Africa and nonprofits. So it is definitely a huge, huge goal to get Cindy there. So Cindy, thank you. This has been a true privilege. And thank you so much for all you do for our sector and the fundraisers. It's just, like I said, Fundraising Beyond Borders would not be here today without all of your support and your guidance and your dedication. So a huge thank you for everything.